every morning at exactly 5:45. Arthur Calloway sat alone in the same booth at Miller's coffee shop.
Same coffee, same newspaper, same silence. For almost 30 years. Nobody needed to ask what he wanted anymore. The coffee arrived before he even spoke. And strangely, every important man in town noticed whether Arthur was there or not. The first person to openly question it was a young newspaper reporter named Daniel Reed. Who is that guy?
That's just old man Thompson. He's been coming here for years. That depends who's asking.
Arthur Calloway almost never joined conversations himself. People came to him. Especially when money was involved. By 7 hot that morning, a $600,000 grain contract had already changed hands. Daniel started noticing a pattern almost immediately. Men walked into that diner worried about losing farms and walked out with solutions. Even the banks treated Arthur differently than everyone else. But the strange part was, almost nobody knew exactly what Arthur actually owned. His name appeared quietly across 40 years of business records. Land auctions, cattle contracts, oil leases, foreclosure rescues. And somehow, every major deal in Millbrook County seemed to begin in that exact corner booth. So what was he? A rancher? Banker? Investor?
He was something else entirely.
The old waitress looked toward Arthur quietly. Then she said something Daniel never forgot. He's the man people call when the banks stop answering the phone. Daniel Reed spent 3 days building enough courage to finally approach Arthur Calloway directly. Before Daniel even introduced himself, Arthur already knew his name.
Small-town reporters ask too many questions. But sometimes that's useful.
The waitress didn't interrupt. Nobody interrupted Arthur when business conversations started. You want to know why bankers come here? Because desperate men hate office buildings. Daniel expected arrogance from rich men. Arthur sounded more like a tired farmer than a businessman. Back in 1974, Arthur had almost lost everything himself. Cattle prices collapsed, fuel prices exploded, and the banks stopped pretending they cared about farmers. That was the first night Arthur sat in booth number 7. The waitress gave him free coffee because she thought he looked hungry. Arthur never forgot it. Men like Arthur remembered kindness longer than money. By noon that same day, another rancher walked into the diner looking terrified. Daniel watched Arthur study the paperwork for less than 30 seconds. Then Arthur pointed to 3 numbers and immediately found the problem the bank had missed. The rancher looked stunned. Nobody at the bank had explained it that clearly before. That was the moment Daniel understood something important. Arthur wasn't lucky. Arthur was dangerous. You don't have an income problem. You have a timing problem. "10 minutes later, the rancher shook Arthur's hand like a drowning man finding land. How much land does he actually own? More than you'd think. More than anyone thinks.
The waitress smiled carefully. Then she answered, "Nobody really knows. But if Arthur stops showing up here someday, half this county goes bankrupt."
That night, Daniel Reed stayed in the newspaper office long after everyone else went home. At first, the records didn't make sense. The names were different, but the patterns were identical. Small cattle companies, tiny grain partnerships, quiet land trusts. Every one of them somehow traced back to Arthur Calloway. While other men chased fast money during the 1970s, Arthur quietly bought struggling farmland nobody wanted. And unlike the banks, he never tried humiliating people when they were desperate. That was why people trusted him. Not because he was rich, because he remembered what losing everything felt like. The next morning, even the bank president showed up before sunrise. "Mr. Morgan, I came as soon as I could. A manufacturing company outside town was collapsing. 300 jobs depended on that refinancing." Daniel watched carefully. Arthur barely spoke for the first 5 minutes. Old men who survive financial disasters learn something valuable. Listening reveals more than talking. I don't want to beg you. We're in trouble, deep trouble. You expanded too fast. And now interest rates are eating you alive. The banker didn't argue. That told Daniel everything. Arthur had survived the farm crisis because he feared debt more than poverty. Then Arthur wrote a single number on a napkin and slid it across the table. Then Arthur wrote a single number on a napkin and slid it across the table. The banker looked completely speechless. The amount was enough to save the company. That was the moment Daniel finally understood the truth. Arthur wasn't sitting in the coffee shop waiting for deals. The deals were coming there to find him. You still think he's just a farmer?
Kid.
You haven't even learned his real business yet.
The next morning, Daniel arrived at the diner before Arthur for the first time.
You're getting obsessed.
Maybe she was right, because Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the napkin.
At exactly 5:45, Arthur Calloway walked through the door like he had every morning for decades. Same booth, same coffee, same silence. How rich are you actually? Rich men count money. I count winners.
Daniel had no idea what that meant. Arthur noticed immediately.
Bad winters teach you things banks never will.
How to survive with less. How to stay calm when everybody else panics.
And most importantly, to recognize desperate men before they recognize themselves. Right then, a man from Dallas walked into the diner wearing a suit worth more than most pickup trucks in town. We both know why I'm here, Arthur. Let's talk numbers. The oil company wanted pipeline access through county farmland. Arthur looked at the map for less than 15 seconds. Then he shook his head. Then Arthur redrew the entire pipeline route himself. This is the best parcel? Best? No, but it's the only one that matters. Of course he did. Arthur had helped save half those farms personally during the crisis years. And suddenly Daniel understood why powerful men kept coming to booth number 7. Because Arthur Calloway didn't just know money, he knew survival.
Daniel Reed spent the next several weeks chasing Arthur Calloway's story across the entire county.
And the deeper he looked, the stranger the story became.